20:32 hours, September the 9th, 2549. Military calendar. Procyon system. Arcadia. Valigus felt the deck of the ship imperceptibly ripple as it emerged from slipspace. The bridge displays winked on and showed the verdant glow of the colony the humans called Arcadia. The ship connected into the local battlenet, and the bridge was suddenly filled with crisscrossing tactical chatter of Covenant forces on the ground. "Shipmaster, our forces clearing their city have been destroyed," the comms officer by the name of Merg Vol-E reported. The shipmaster, a well-seasoned elite by the name of Rocco Tarui, wearing the customary gold combat harness, manipulated the holodisplays and revealed the still smouldering traces of a carpet bombing run performed by the human starfighters. "The damage is superficial." He half turned his head towards Valigus. "Your infantile prize may yet still be intact. But heed my warning, I have my own objectives here, and should yours get in my way, I will not value your life or the lives of your brutes over the extermination of the infidels. I shall burn you all, should it come to it." Valigus stepped up to his side, making note that he was a head taller than the shipmaster and half again as broad. Grand words from such a meagre specimen, Valigus simply grunted a response. A bright white light suddenly filled the holodisplays, causing severe interference. "EMP," one of the bridge officers called out. It originated from within one of their facilities. "Likely a data purge. They are quick to scuttle their systems." Valigus chuckled to himself. "It would appear your objective, shipmaster, is now no longer a possibility." "Then we commence immediately with cleansing," the shipmaster retorted. "Wrong. You will focus on that." Valigus nodded towards another display. "And then you will hold until I have collected the artifact." The shipmaster glanced at the display to see a human ship, one of their frigates, emerge from the shadow of the planet and begin moving towards them at increasing speed. Despite this, the shipmaster began to contest. "I do not take orders from..." Valigus cut him off. "No, but do you wish to be responsible for the loss of an artifact that could see the rapid extermination of the humans and the punctual arrival of the Great Journey?" The shipmaster cocked his head in curiosity. Valigus and his brutes had been following valuable intelligence gained by what many would consider an unholy alliance with a band of human warriors, and that intelligence, and the fruits of its efficient execution, had gained the favour of a few influential individuals on the High Council. "I am sure the members of the High Council would be fascinated to hear how you subverted my mission out of pride and hampered our progress along the path." Valigus barely believed the promise of the Sacred Rings and the Great Journey, but noted that referencing it strategically gained some interesting and beneficial reactions from his opposers. "I am here on their orders, and it is their favour that bartered me my position on this ship and the service of its crew and its shipmaster," Valigus stated matter-of-factly. The shipmaster snarled at this condescension before his subordinates, but begrudgingly acknowledged the authority Valigus carried. "Very well. Ready your brutes," the shipmaster replied, turning his attention back to the bridge crew as the human ship passed below his vessel and began retreating away. "Ready weapons." Extraction from Arcadia was chaotic to say the least. Having executed their mission, Ares had fallen back to the extraction point and boarded one of the only 19 pelicans that made it off-world as the Covenant began glassing it. Those 19 pelicans carried the last of just 200 survivors of the colony, along with the last of the UNSC forces capable of reaching extraction in time. It was entirely possible there were still Marines on the ground who were now doomed to endure the glassing of the world. The city, once holding 2 million, would have yet more bodies who came to its defense buried under the obsidian surface to come. The Pelican carrying Fireteam Ares and a handful of survivors made orbit and approached its assigned frigate. The other Pelicans had already docked with their motherships, which had then jumped out of system on random slipspace vectors as per the Col protocol. The Pelican aligned for docking, approaching from below and behind the frigate along its centre line. Nearer the rear of the frigate was a large boxy hangar bay that the Pelican was aiming for. The pilot handed off docking control to an automated system that adjusted the Pelican's final position and rapidly lifted the Pelican up into the tight hangar bay, faster and more precisely than any human could. The Pelican lifted high into the hangar bay and perfectly docked with a shock-absorbing docking plate on the ceiling of the hangar bay. The Pelican shuddered in response and its engines began spooling down. Below, the floor of the hangar bay slid shut, and the docking plate began moving quickly along a heavy-duty lifting rail, cycling the Pelican through an airlock and into the starboard Pelican bay of the ship. The docking plate lowered the Pelican to the deck and it touched down with a rumble, cushioned by its landing gear. The troop bay hissed as it equalised pressure with the atmosphere of the frigate, and the troop bay door opened as the UNSC medical personnel quickly boarded and began tending to the survivors. Ares stood aside to grant them clear access on board, and then stepped out into the frigate's cavernous interior. The harsh white lights overhead made looking up very uncomfortable, so they simply moved quickly out of the Pelican bay and into its crew areas. The frigate was already preparing to jump into slipspace, so Ares had limited time to stow their gear and make ready for cryosleep. In the minutes that it took for Ares to stow their weapons and move to the cryobays, they had very little interaction with anyone else on board, including each other. At this point, after 2 solid days with no sleep, some sound R&R was all they had in mind, and although cryosleep wasn't exactly like curling up in a warm, comfortable bed with fresh sheets, it was at the least a period of downtime, not that they'd actually be fully aware of it. Cryosleep was necessary for interstellar travel, not because the journey between systems took years. Far from it, humanity's slipspace travel could get them from one end of human space to the other in a matter of weeks, but was more so a necessity to save on energy and resources. Stowing all non-essential crew in cryosleep consumed less energy, less food, less water, and meant the ship didn't need entertainment or recreation areas for the crew to keep them occupied. Fireteam Ares filtered into the cryobay as technicians quickly prepared 4 cryopods for them. Normally a person would have to enter cryosleep completely naked, as generally speaking, covered skin reacted badly with the cryogenic procedure, resulting in raw, blistered and cracked skin. Fireteam Ares' new armour, however, apparently had been engineered to allow it to be worn without such negative effects, so they stood by and waited to be attended to, while several others climbed into their cryopods. Most of them quietly went about their own business, but Marcos made note of a few sideways glances from some of the Marines. Another group of Marines entered the crybay behind them and kept a wary distance. Marcos could hear some quiet chatter between them, and overheard the word Spartan being uttered. Marcos, quite casually, looked over his shoulder and locked his hazel eyes with one of the Marines. "We're ODSTs, not Spartans." The young Marine nodded nervously, and Marcos cracked a small smile as something of a reassurance. He was obviously not at liberty to discuss that although they were ODSTs, they had been augmented with a couple of prototype augmentations for the next generation of Spartans, to see if fully grown adults could be augmented. They had made them well over 2 meters in height and approximately 3 times stronger than a normal human, and they were wearing an advanced prototype form-fitting armor system minus the helmet, so at face value they certainly fit the bill as a Spartan. Marcos returned his attention forward as the technicians began ushering them forward. The last 2 people being cycled into cryo ahead of them had climbed into their pods. One a 30-something Hispanic engineer with a day's too much beard growth for regulations, and the other a slender female medical doctor with fiery red hair in a thick braid. Jay had noticed the tension in the room due to their presence, and decided to take it upon himself to break that tension by making a joke at Marcos's expense. As Marcos simply looked ahead waiting to be attended to get into his cryopod, Jay seized the opportunity to imply that Marcos was staring at the attractive doctor. Jay bumped his shoulder into Marcos's and said quietly, but not so quietly, "Pervert." The remark broke the tension in the room and drew suppressed chuckles from a few others in the bay, including the attractive doctor. Marcos half sighed and smiled and shook his head, briefly made note of the ease at which the horrors of a colony falling were shunned aside now. There was a time when he would mourn the loss of every human life, in spite of their lives' actions. It was once his strongly held belief that death was the ultimate equalizer. All debts were paid by the grave. Yet here he stood, immediately following the utter destruction of an entire planet at the hands of the Covenant, and they were making jokes. He briefly pondered on the possibility that he'd become desensitized to it all, which had both its pros and cons. He could maintain a better battle mindset, but at the long-term cost of his emotional well-being and his humanity. But in the same breath, some tragedies are just too large for a human mind to truly comprehend. He made a mental note to check Ares' next psych eval date after this rotation of cryosleep. The pods closed and the occupants were quickly cycled into cryosleep, before the pods moved along trackways on the walls, through hatches in the ceiling and into mass cryo-storage areas where dozens of pods could be stacked together and electronically called back to the bay for revival at the other end of the jump across space. The next batch of cryopods cycled into position and opened to receive Fireteam Ares. Without needing to undress, they simply each climbed into their respective pods. An automated voice spoke from small speakers near their heads, identifying the occupant of each pod. The covers quickly folded down, and Marcos simply breathed slowly and deeply a few times, allowing the chilled gases leaking into the pod to fill his lungs. His vision blurred, and all colour and detail dissolved into a soft grey of nothingness. Thoughts left his mind as Fireteam Ares were quickly sent into a dreamless sleep. In short order, a bronchial surfactant was pumped into the pod along with a cocktail of chemicals to prevent freezer burn and large ice crystals forming in the occupant cells. And the pods were, once again, moved up the walls and into storage. The frigate was now moving away from Arcadia, her engines at full thrust, now pulling out of low orbit. In order to activate their Shore Fujikawa Translight slipspace engine drives and achieve faster-than-light travel in the hyperdimensions of slipstream space, they had to be away from any powerful gravity wells. The Covenant ships didn't suffer from this problem owing to being significantly more advanced, which was exactly the issue the frigate now faced. Directly ahead, a Covenant ship dropped out of slipspace. The frigate adjusted its course to dive below the ship and hopefully avoid the worst of its offensive capabilities. When Covenant ships dropped out of slipspace, it took a few minutes for their weapon systems to come back online. The frigate was already within weapons range, yet showed no signs of an aggressive response. The frigate passed just a few thousand kilometers below the Covenant ship and continued to accelerate away. It was at this moment the ship's weapons began charging. The frigate was now approaching the velocity needed to enter slipspace and was within a margin of error for being just about far away enough from Arcadia's gravity well. The captain ordered the slipspace jump be started, and right as the bridge crew made final preparations, the Covenant ship fired at its aft section, disabling the slipspace drive. The ship lurched forward under the attack and its nose pitched downward, but continued at full thrust. The Covenant ship fired a salvo of plasma torpedoes which rapidly closed on the frigate. Its point defense guns made short work of most of the torpedoes, but one slipped past and struck the narrow spine between the frigate's main engines and its body, burning through layers of titanium armour and superstructural material beneath. The frigate continued, nonetheless, confident that they could at least get outside of weapons range and call for help once they were further out of system. The Covenant ship wasn't finished yet. It fired a barrage of pulse lasers. The beams lanced across space and struck the engine manifolds of the frigate, severing their connection to the ship's main reactor and effectively leaving her without thrust. The spine of the ship gave way under the stress, and the rear of the ship, holding the thrusters and a large portion of engineering, detached entirely. The backfeed of nuclear fusion energy still within the thrusters caused an explosion which tore the severed engines apart. It also served to mask the near-complete survival of the forward section of the ship. Her reactors were exposed and venting energy into space, which further softened the superstructural material around it, causing it to break off and begin tumbling through space. But this also served as convincing cover, as the interference caused by the venting reactor distorted any long-range scans of the debris field. The forward section of the frigate, now dark and cold, continued drifting through space at escape velocity, completely invisible to the Covenant ship, whose detection systems were now only picking up return signals from the scattered debris field and leaking nuclear energy. On board, much of the crew still operating the ship had perished, either killed by the attack or vented out into space. The bridge crew still sealed within the bridge were likely still alive, but without power, they were as good as dead. The husk of the frigate would now continue to drift in perpetuity, unseen and forgotten.
Confirmed. Survivors extracted. $200 souls. 200 out of 12 million. have the last UNSC ship in orbit. Awaiting Pelican Tango 261. Survivors recovered. Fireteam Ares on board.
Okay, set random vector and let's get out of the system.
Sir, Covenant ship inbound. Abandoned ship.
Valigus strode through the ship to the hangar bay to board a Phantom. His brute stood aside and allowed him to board first. They followed closely behind, and the Phantom closed its side panels and quickly took off to exit the hangar bay and descend to the surface of the human world of Arcadia. Valigus moved forward and down to the cockpit of the Phantom. "Where are they?" Valigus asked. "They are awaiting your arrival on the outskirts of the city the Prophet of Regrets forces attacked over a decade ago," his pilot responded. "Good. Typical of a prophet to find superficial information that led to a prize they were ultimately unable to secure. Speaking such words to most within the Covenant would be viewed upon as heresy, but here, on this Phantom, surrounded by his brutes, Valigus knew he could speak his mind. Every brute standing at his side were loyal to him because he had the vision and aspirations to draw the Jirulhane out of the shadow of the Covenant. The Jirulhane were once a powerful race and had achieved space travel on their own before their beta instincts led to the First Immolation, a war that culminated in the use of nuclear weapons and the near extinction of their kind. The Covenant found the species shortly thereafter, just when they had rediscovered rocketry. Had the Covenant arrived before the war, the Jirulhane would not have become a slave to the Covenant hierarchy. They'd have either fought them back or died trying. Ever since, the Jirulhane were exploited for their battle prowess and subjugated by the Sanghili and Sanchayum, being pious to a religion that was not their own, and thankful for the scraps they were begrudgingly bestowed, was an insult to the pride of the Jirulhane. Countless generations of complacency had marched the Jirulhane to the lowliest of positions, and so far removed from their nature. Valigus, and a few noble others, had been quietly sowing the seeds of a rise of the Jirulhane. Some planned and schemed within the Covenant to rise their position in the ranks, but Valigus knew even this was still selling his species and their immense potential short. The only way for the Jirulhane to achieve the greatness they truly carried in their hearts was by superseding from the Covenant entirely and taking charge of their own destiny. The Covenant's short-sightedness will be the death of them, his pilot replied. Chieftain, there are others who seek a similar prize for the Jirulhane. Would it not be prudent to join forces? You speak of Atriox, Valigus replied. I do, Chieftain. The Banished have as much reason as any to despise the Covenant. If what we seek here is truly capable of unshackling the Jirulhane, the more allies we have in short order, the faster we can separate from their doomed cause. You speak wisdom, brother, but I fear eagerness in this can be as fatal as blindly following the great journey. Valigus paused. Once we are certain that the artifact here is as we believe, we will begin rallying the Jirulhane, but not a moment before. The pilot clicked his tusks together in satisfaction. Yes, Chieftain. We are closing on our landing zone. Valigus placed his hand upon the shoulder of his pilot. Patience and cunning, brother. Traits our enemies believe we lack, but that we will weaponize and use to shatter the very path they walk upon. Valigus returned to the hold with the rest of his brutes as the Phantom came to a hover above a large sprawling facility overlooking a basin. The asphalt below was cracked and vegetation had begun growing through the cracks. He disembarked the Phantom, falling several feet to the ground. His golden armor clanked and shifted as he absorbed the impact. and was quickly joined by his brutes as they walked to the knee-high rusted railings near the drop-off down to the basin. Below, emerging from thick jungle canopy, was the instantly recognisable glisten of fauna metal, and in the distance, the remains of a super scarab guarding the entrance to a subterranean facility. Their destination. The hike down into the basin was steep and punctuated by narrow rocky outcrops which hindered the comparatively massive physical size of the brutes. After a few very close scrapes with rocks causing superficial damage to the surface of their armour, the pack finally made it to the bottom and began navigating through the ruins of the fauna structures, many of which had severe damage from heavy plasma weaponry. The pack wove their way towards the centre of the basin, past the ruins of a UNSC firebase. As they moved further, the long dormant remains of destroyed power nodes provided a path to their destination, following the long since drained plasma conduits that still lay across the ground. They came across the bones of Scorpion main battle tanks, Cobras and Warhogs laying where they fell, left over from the battle between the UNSC and the Covenant forces. Even the crumpled wreckage of a Locust lay amongst the vitriol of the battle. Finally they approached the fauna structure at the centre. In the maw of the structure's entrance, the dominating carcass of a super scarab lay battered and broken. A formidable platform, Valigus spoke, regarding the husk that lay in front of him. A shame it wasn't fully operational when the UNSC arrived. We must get inside. His brutes began to move towards the wreckage to begin picking a route through the entrance of the fauna structure, when a creak sounded from deep within. The brutes brought their weapons to bear, and they held. Whoa! A human dressed in dark grey battle fatigues and a mix of ODST armour and brute plating revealed themselves from within the wreckage, followed by 3 others. Let's not do anything we might regret. You haven't even seen the best bits yet. If you truly wish to remain living, you are making some questionable decisions regarding your conduct, one of the brutes barked. You might see it that way, the human began, but old Valigus here knows that we got the magic touch. Valigus stepped forward. As I explained to you when we plucked you from Actium, as long as you keep yourselves useful, you'll keep breathing. I did tell you, however, not to go inside. The human replied with a little less confidence. Hey, no need to treat us like kids. We were just checking out the entranceway to make sure it was clear and not rigged with any explosive surprises. If you wish to not be treated as infants, Damon, you must first cease behaving as one. Do not force my hand to discipline, as it would be a lesson harsh in nature and fast for you to learn, Valigus calmly threatened. What did you find? It's all clear, the leader, Damon, flatly replied. Good. Then lead the way, Fireteam Ares. The humans turned and began showing the clearest path through the wreckage to the entranceway. Despite being clear enough for the humans to pick their way through, Jiralhane were, on average, 3 feet taller, 3 feet wider in their armour, and massed more than any 3 humans. The brutes had to resort to scratching through gaps just wide enough for them and physically moving wreckage too tight for them to pass, being careful not to shift the way the wreckage was resting and cause a collapse. Finally, the twisted metal and mess of conduits gave way, and the pristine fauna metal beckoned them inside. The floors lightly pulsed with geometric blue energy cascades, and the lights overhead cast shadows along the walls. The entrance split in 2 directions and rejoined on the other side, in front of a large golden metallic door. One of the humans stepped forward, and as if reacting to their presence, a holographic panel winked into existence. The human touched the panel and the door rumbled to life. Dozens of panels near the seam of the door shifted and retracted, causing dust to rain down from above, which was quickly drawn inwards by a sudden rush of air as the panels of the door separated and retracted into the walls. Beyond, a hallway that dropped sharply down was dimly lit by several lights that winked to life. The pack and the 4 humans moved through and began descending deep into the structure. After following a labyrinthine series of corridors and ramps and passageways that snaked over a kilometre beneath the surface, the pack entered into a large, cavernous room. At the centre, a circular geometric raised platform pulsed gently with blue light. Valigus stepped upon its surface and moved towards its centre.
One of the humans moved to his side, and a hollow panel appeared. Valigus reached out and touched one of the symbols. It felt solid to touch and reacted by depressing slightly and then evaporating. The platform beneath his feet reverberated and two pillar-like devices raised up from its surface. The upper, roughly hexagonal surfaces lit up with two identical symbols that Valigus recognized as meaning reclamation. The human put their hands upon the two pillars, and above them, in the darkness, immense machinery moved and came to life. A solitary ring of blue light sparked to life high above within the ceiling, and the sounds of moving machinery grew louder. In the darkness, the silhouettes of immense armatures moved, and a large structure extended, articulated, and descended towards them. Finally, the light at the ceiling cascaded down the armature's length, lighting the cavernous room more substantively, and finally revealing a large circular-ringed structure holding a silver spherical object over 2 meters across with a single lens at its center. The lens suddenly sparked to life, revealing a smooth blue glow. Then it spoke in a deep, authoritative voice. Reclaimers identified. This is Reformer Facility 106.94. What is your will? Valigus stepped forward and spoke. What is the purpose of this facility? Access denied, the voice replied. Valigus glared at the human in frustration. What is the purpose of this facility? Damon repeated. The voice replied. Central control and coordination of the orbital reformer platforms across the Fauna Ecumene. Reclaimer, does this primitive speak for you? Yes, Damon confirmed. He hesitated. A friend. Acknowledged. Valigus began. Oracle. I am the geologist, the voice corrected. Valigus silently cursed himself for using the Covenant's term for Fauna AIs. What are the orbital reformers? Valigus asked. A brief pause followed, and then, orbital reformers are machines harnessed by the builders to break barren worlds into their constituent minerals for processing. They provide the raw materials for which megastructures are constructed. A world-shattering weapon, Valigus's voice almost in reverence. A mischaracterization. These devices are not weapons, they are tools, and worlds that are harvested are barren and devoid of life, the geologist replied. Valigus pressed. But one could be used on a living planet, no? Hypothetically, yes. It would tear the world asunder and process it all the same, whether it was barren or still living. In this regard, I can agree. It would be a weapon. How many of these reformers still exist? Valigus asked further. The last records show that 13,327 of the reformers are still in existence, either in low power or stasis mode. Valigus stepped away, contemplating the information he'd just been told. If these reformers were as powerful as suggested, they'd be worthy prizes indeed. Just one would have the power to rip High Charity apart entirely. Valigus turned back around and faced the glowing eye. Show me the reformers. Impossible. The reformers are not at this location. This is the central control and coordination, then show me the control station. A brief silence held the room, and then the geologist's armatures articulated, lifting it clear as it replied, As you wish. The room fell into darkness once more as the geologist's armor powered off. Then a series of lights lit up along the ceiling, revealing a dusty path to an immense door. The door itself was covered in a layer of dust which fractured and fell away, as dozens of individual mechanical components of the door moved for likely the first time in 100 millennia. The dust settled, and the door, made of a gleaming golden alloy inlaid with dark veins of tungsten-like features, clunked and then retracted as smooth as it would if it were newly made. Beyond, a series of corridors led deeper into the facility. Valigus stepped through the threshold as the comparatively tiny humans moved past him and led the way. The geologist's presence was only telegraphed by portions of the facility lighting up and opening for the group as they progressed deeper. Finally, they came to a door that was 3 times wider and twice as high as the first they'd come through. This one was majoritively made of a darker tungsten-like material, and as energy rippled through the inner workings of the door, several larger panels unlocked and slid back, revealing an intricate and exotic circuitry within. And then the majority of the door itself slid up into the ceiling, with a few side panels retreating into the walls. The group moved into an immense chamber with a single walkway leading to a large circular platform with a holographic console at the end. The room's lights bloomed from off to full brightness, revealing the room to be a large hexagonal prism. They approached the console and Damon reached out to touch it. It came to life and coursed with energy. Valigus moved to his side and looked upon the console in puzzlement. The markings upon its surface were a mystery to him. A small light winked on and revealed a small holographic representation of the geologist. "What would you have this installation do?" the geologist asked. "Show me the location of the closest reformer," Valigus demanded. A star map appeared in the air and quickly reorientated, revealing a world Valigus had a vague recollection of. It was a small, outlying world at the edge of Covenant-controlled space. "Geologist," Valigus began. "Would it be as simple as going to this location and claiming the reformer for my own?" "No," it replied. "You will require a keystone for its activation, one that carries with it the initialization protocols of this installation. Once the keystone is united with the core, the reformer will rise out of stasis and can be controlled and given a target thereafter." "Where can I find one of these keystones?" Valigus asked. A previously hidden containment unit blended into the edges of the walkway opened, and rising up out of the interior were several satin black geometric devices. Vaguely crystalline in nature except for their black appearance, a deep purple light began emanating from below them, and the stones lifted from their housings, floating up into the air a few feet. The purple light seemed to jump the gap and pull along the edges of the geometric shape. It then coalesced on the faces into a deep purple glow and then seemed to dive inward towards the stone's centre, returning to its blackened state. Valigus approached the stone and plucked it from the air. He examined it curiously for a moment and then turned to his pack. "We have a new destination. The reformer awaits us, and with it, we will see the Jiralhane liberated."
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider smashing the like button and leave a comment below on what you'd like me to cover next. Big shout out to my patrons Spartan10148, the Metarch of my installation, Falcon, Prophet Bear, Mikhail, Sophia, and Ashley, my dutiful monitors, Darian, Scarab, Spartan0137, Anthony, Ghost, Aaron, Chris, Jacob, Sean, Element Zero, Somatic, Jordan J3, Dan, Mr. Keys, Directal, Gunslinger, Jacob, Bandmill, Echo, Evermore, Officer Cat, and Personal Devil, my diligent sub-monitors, my fleet of Strato Sentinels, and my loyal enforcers. And all the other patrons who have jumped aboard to support the channel. It means more to me than I can accurately put into words. Another shout out to my Tier 0 Transcendent YouTube members, Spartan137, Jacob, Schmitty, Talia, Fenrir, and Born Stellar, and all the other YouTube members keeping my installation running on that glorious vacuum energy. Shout out to John for I don't fucking know. And if you want more of this kind of content, hit the subscribe button and the little bell icon so you don't miss any future videos, and consider jumping aboard yourself as a patron or YouTube member to keep the channel alive and kicking. Thanks again for watching, take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.